My name is Marguerite Malone O'Connor, and I was born in Cambridge, Massachusetts on December 20th, 1918? No, 1917? Okay. Okay. And I had no brothers or sisters. I was an only child.
And what are, when you think about your childhood, what are some of the things that you remember about your childhood? What do you remember about your parents?
Well, I had playmates in Cambridge, and we just played with a ball on the street. There was little or no traffic coming down the hill, and it was a very active childhood.
What were your parents' names, and what do you remember about your parents?
Well, my mother died in the flu epidemic of 1917, and so my father asked one of his sisters to come from Newfoundland and take care of me. And then I had a grandmother also. And so I had a nice household of caretakers.
So your mother died right after you were born?
Uh, she died, I was born in 1917. She died, I just don't know when, but maybe 1916, the previous year.
Well, she must have died after you were born.
Yeah, that usually comes. That usually happens.
uh,
You have told us that it was January of 1918, so
Oh,
just you were
yeah.
young.
He, I was about a year old when she died in the flu epidemic of that era.
and what do you remember about your father? What was his name, and what type of person was he?
Well, his name was Richard, and he was um, a very good father. And every Friday, that was our night to go out on a date. And we used to go to the movies on Friday evening at the Exeter Theater in Cambridge.
And do you remember having favorite movies as a kid? What were your? Do you remember some of your favorite films?
The movies that I saw, there was, I can't recall the titles of them, but they were they didn't have any provocative scenes in them or anything. They were about farm girls and farm girls' social activities.
And so it sounds like your aunt helped raise you too, right? What was her name, and what was she like?
Yeah, her name was, it took a while for her to clear all the papers about coming to another country, but she came from St. John's, Newfoundland, and took care of me until my father remarried when I was about 12 or 13, 14.
Did you ever get to go to Newfoundland as a kid? That was probably a really neat place to go visit.
Yeah, I went there as a child with my grandmother. I was escorting my grandmother because she was deaf and she could not read or write. She went to school, but they didn't have the patience to, in those days, to teach uh, an individual with uh, physical incapabilities, and so she never learned to read or write. But we got along fine together.
So you lived in Cambridge. What did your father do for a living?
He was in the printing business, and he used to set type out of a checkerboard type case, and he'd pick it with very much rapidity. He knew just where the I's and the T's and the S's were, and so he'd pull those out. And then he had a small business where he printed business cards for other people, other businesses, and envelopes and letterheads and things of that kind.
So you spent your whole childhood in Cambridge? Or you went to high school? What was your schooling like?
Uh, no, my childhood was mostly in Cambridge, but then my father remarried when I was about 12, and then we moved to Boston and to Newbury Street in Boston, and that was a brownstone uh, house, and we took in roomers. So I spent the rest of my teenage years making beds and
You were like an
Scrubbing
Airbnb.
floors.
She was
Huh?
an Airbnb. She was
Yeah.
an early Airbnb.
Right.
I never got paid for it.
You still owed those back wages? You still?
Yes, I'm adding them all up.
And then so you took roomers in, and then what was next for you?
Well, then I met a young man from mutual acquaintances, and his name, he was from an Irish family, and his name was O'Connor. So, in a suitable length of time, we married, and then we began a family.
But you came to Cleveland before you met him, right?
Yes,
You
he
didn't
was a
meet him in
Clevelander.
Boston, yeah.
Uh-huh.
Tell us about your connection to Cleveland. How did you end up coming to Cleveland?
Well, I had a cousin who had a wide social life, and so through her I met my husband.
And you came to Cleveland because of the Depression, right? Partly. It was a little hard to find a job.
It was hard to find a job in Boston. Yeah.
When you first came to Cleveland, Cleveland was one of the greatest cities in the country, right? Tell me about Cleveland back when you first came here.
Well, Cleveland was very social, and there was a lot of activity going on. And then, through mutual acquaintances, I got a job at Jack and Heinz,
Mm-hmm.
and that was like reaching seventh heaven.
A job doing what? What did you do?
I was a um, I was a secretary to a man who had a good sense of humor, and his name was Leo Bauer, and he had a good sense of humor, and everything worked out fine for me.
Tell us what Jack and Heinz did. It was a very interesting company, wasn't it?
Yes, they made the bomb sight. In those days, the floor of an attacking plane had a sliding panel in it where they could push it aside, and then the bombardier would sit over the open panel, and when they were over the target, he would say bombs away, and then they would drop the bomb on the target.
Mm-hmm. And one of the owners of the company invented a more accurate sighting device, right?
Yes, the what was that called? A sherry bomb sight or something like that, where a panel could be opened, and the bombardier would sit over the open panel, and when they were over the target, that was his cry, bombs away, and down would come the bomb on the target.
Uh-huh.
Was your last name was O'Connor, and you married an O'Connor?
No,
No.
my last name was Malone.
Malone. Okay. And what was your wedding like?
Well, I don't know. It was it was a very nice social activity, and I can't remember where the reception was held, but
Remember the date for it? It was, I believe you told me it was on a Monday,
oh yeah,
November 12th, 1945.
uh huh,
And I know do you remember where your wedding was held? The church?
yeah. It was in some sort of a party.
The reception, yeah, at the plantation, maybe? Was it called the plantation?
Yes, at the plantation on Euclid Avenue.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And your wedding itself was at
St. Agnes's
Right.
Church.
Mhm.
Yep.
Where's that? Is it still around, St. Agnes's?
The tower is still there.
Okay. And what
So
was your,
the bell tower, the rest of the church has been demolished, but right just past the clinic on Euclid Avenue, the bell tower is still there.
okay.
Yeah. So how did you come to be in St. Agnes's Parish? Because you when you first came to Cleveland, you lived on Coit Road, right? That we pass on the way to Sheila's house all the time?
Yeah. Well, that was Lizzie Baker's house,
Mhm.
and then my family from Boston came to Cleveland, and so then they had their own quarters, and I was expected to come to live with them.
Uh-huh. Yeah. So then you moved out from Lizzie Baker's to
Mhm.
a
Yeah.
a rooming house, you said, right?
She
Was it-
didn't have a rooming house.
Oh,
It
okay.
was just a flat.
Nice. Yeah, so that was in St. It's like East 80th or something in Euclid, maybe, roughly. Oh,
Yeah, I
cool.
saw some pictures of a building that I don't think exists anymore. It would be in the middle of the clinic campus. That was a fancy hotel on Euclid that I think that Rockefeller lived in at one point.
Mm,
Yeah, I can't remember what the name of it was now.
uh-huh.
Yeah, it was on Carnegie.
From Carnegie. So
Oh, the Southern Tavern.
That's what it was, Southern Tavern. And who was your best man and who was your maid of honor?
The best man was my future brother-in-law, and the maid of honor was a friend
Uh-huh. Yeah, Helen Urbanic.
from Akron.
Helen Urbanic, right?
Uh-huh.
Who was my godmother then.
Uh-huh.
And then Uncle Jack, right?
Yeah.
Dad's brother Jack. Yeah. And how about your wedding dress with all the beautiful buttons down the
Oh, yeah.
sleeves?
That took
all
a
buttons down the back, beautiful silk.
that
You were
took
a
a
gorgeous
little.
bride.
Yeah. I think it was a second-hand wedding dress.
Really?
I think so. I think I
Ooh.
picked it up in a second-hand shop because
gorgeous.
everything was not clothing was not manufactured too elaborately in those days
Mhm.
because of the war.
Well, it was a beautiful dress. She kept it for a long time and I tried it on once. Yeah.
what was your husband's name?
My husband, Michael.
Michael.
Uh-huh.
And what do you remember about Michael? What were the things that you fell in love with?
Well, he had a good disposition, and he liked to sing. People kept telling him that he needed to train his voice, so he didn't train his voice, but he liked to sing, and he could belt out some good music.
What did you have a family right after you got married? How did you have kids and talk about having kids?
Well, it took a while for the children to come along, and I lost, I think it was 3 of them at the beginning of when they were just real tiny, and so
Mhm. So you lost 3 of your pregnancies, but you carried 4, right?
yeah.
Yay!
So, and what are your 4 kids' names, and what order did they come?
Well,
And who's your favorite?
well, there was Sheila and Richard, and I think Debbie was one of them.
Yeah. Number 2,
Yeah.
and then number 4.
So I was grateful for them.
Yeah. How about your youngest?
Who was last?
Connie.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, and Connie had married into a well-known Cleveland family.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have any interactions with anybody else that was sort of famous in Cleveland back then? Did you know, like, any?
No.
No.
Oh,
So where did you settle? With your family? Did you bought a house on? You said on Coit? Is that where you bought a house?
No, that's where she came when she moved to Cleveland.
So
but
did you buy a house? Where did you settle?
oh, we didn't buy a house, but we rented an apartment, and it was, I think it was around Coit Road,
Mhm.
as far as I can remember. Been a long time.
That's where you raised the kids?
No, we that was a first residence, but then
Then, do you remember how you got? When I was born, we lived on Ann Court. Do you remember how you got that apartment?
well, I knew the owners of the house,
Uh-huh.
and they got a vacancy. One of the second floor apartment became vacant, and so they offered it to us, and so we took it. You have to take what you can.
And that was on Ann Court, which is off of Ansel Road, right? By Liberty Boulevard or
Yeah, near
Martin Luther
St.
King-
Thomas's Church.
St. Thomas Aquinas Church. And that's where I was baptized, right?
Mm-hmm.
Thomas Aquinas.
Yep.
But I was only 1 month when you moved, right? So where did you move to from there?
I can't remember.
Yeah, let's take a break for a second. How friendly are you?
My mom was remembering her first job was at Higbee's,
Oh, really?
and
In the credit office.
yeah, and she was asking where to open a savings account, and her boss took her over to the window and pointed, right? And what did he say?
Yeah, he pointed over to the Society for Savings. Is that
Yeah.
what it was called
Mhm.
then?
Yeah.
And he says, you put your money in there or you'll never lose it.
Right.
It didn't close during the bank holiday. There was a bank holiday where all the banks closed their doors so that people couldn't withdraw funds.
Hmm. And that was Black Friday, right? October.
I don't know
29th of
exactly what it was.
1929. What October something of 1929? Yeah, crazy, huh? So then she got a job at, what's the next job you got? After Higbee's?
Oh, I went to Toledo Plate and Window Glass.
Yeah.
It was a small shop down on across from the railroad. Oh, on Hamilton.
Mhm.
Is that the name of the road?
Mhm.
And that's where I met Kay Blundell. And then she left that job because she got a job at Jack and Heinz. And then she remembered me and said, "Oh, you got to come. You get free lunch, all kinds of good things."
So this was during World War II, right?
Yeah,
So
and there was
they
a
were-
banquet. The government set a quota for these firms, and if they made the quota that the government set for them, they had a big banquet, and it started off in a small way. The employees went to the Southern Tavern on Carnegie, I think it is, but then the firm grew so fast and so quickly that they had to take over the public hall for the the monthly banquet if they achieved the quota that the government set for them.
Excellent.
Can you imagine public hall filled with table after table of employees? And then tell about the Florida place.
Oh, they had they obtained a place in Florida where they sent the upper crust of the employees for rest and relaxation.
That was in Palm Beach, right? In Palm Beach.
I think that's I'm sort of hazy on that.
Yeah. So then you went down on the train because Mary Cawley, right? Your friend Mary Cawley
Yeah.
had worked for the railroad, so you guys got the train, and then you stayed with Jack and Heinz.
How long was a train ride to Florida from Cleveland? How long did that take?
Oh, probably about a day.
Just a day.
Yeah, we got to sleep on the train. I was in the upper berth. Had to climb a ladder to get up there.
Was that your first time in Florida?
Yes, I think it was. Yeah.
And you developed an appreciation for Florida, clearly?
Yep.
Yeah, right?
Uh-huh.
So, and then the rest of your life, you'd spent a lot of time in Florida.
A lot of time, yep. Yep, met some nice people, good people.
So what else do you remember about raising kids in Cleveland? What do you what do you remember about your time raising kids in Cleveland?
Well, I just remembered that that they were good children. They did what I told them to do and didn't talk back to me. So we got along fine.
Spanking wasn't necessary with Debbie, at least. I mean, no spankings.
No. No.
Just she would hold up the spatula, and that was enough of a threat.
So, where did your kids go to school, and what did they do once they graduated from high school?
Well, let's see, I don't know where you went to school. Well,
For kindergarten, we lived on Barrington by then,
oh,
which was a double house. And then when we got to be a big enough family, we took over both stories of the house because it was 2 bedrooms only. So eventually we took over all 4 bedrooms, top and bottom. But I went to Hazeldell for kindergarten, which was walking distance. And remember Miriam, who lived around the corner, but essentially next door. Her mom walked me to school,
oh yeah.
to Hazeldell.
Uh-huh.
And I had Miss Fry for my teacher. And then we all went to St. Philomena's for grade school.
Oh yeah. Oh.
And tell about on the corner across from St. Philomena's, the little restaurant there. Talk about that.
I don't remember that restaurant.
Yeah? The townhouse restaurant you and Dad did?
Oh yeah, we in order to give us some extra cash, we found a little corner restaurant near St. Philomena's and tried to run that, but it wasn't when we weren't really restaurant people.
It was just a diner? What was the specialty?
It was a just a little corner neighborhood restaurant where people dropped in and had mostly coffee and toast or something like that. No big meals.
How long was that? How long did you own the restaurant?
Oh, maybe 6 months or so.
I think it was actually longer,
Was
probably
it?
about 3 years.
Oh,
So, yeah.
yeah, but it was really a burden to, try to run it without the experience.
What did Michael do for a living?
Well, he was a carpenter. There wasn't much going on in the building industry in those days. People just didn't have the money.
And then also during the winter, there was
Yeah, there were
not much
long.
work. So I think they thought that having the restaurant would, tide them over from till the summer season when he could work as a carpenter again.
Uh-huh.
And remember what did him in? Did you guys in? With the breakfast special? The restaurant across the street offered hash browns with their breakfast special.
Oh no!
Remember that?
What's the world coming to?
Yeah, they got very upset that we moved
That
into
you
the
opened, right? Yeah.
into the neighborhood, and so they wanted to keep their status
Right.
in the neighborhood.
So there was some competition.
Yeah.
You seem to really enjoy it, right? I mean, you were dancing. Do you remember? What do you remember about that party that night?
Well, I remembered I just let down my feelings about what should I make a fool of myself or not.
You just let it go.
Yeah. But it was a nice group of people. They cooperated.
It seemed like everybody had a great time, right? I mean, how often do you get to go to a party for someone who turns 100? Like, it's pretty unusual, And I think people were legitimately excited.
Yeah. Well, somebody that turns 100 and is still able to two-step.
It's impressive. Is there longevity in your family?
No.
No. Well, there is now, obviously.
My grandmother passed away in her 70s, and so did my dad.
Do you have any? I mean, everyone always asks if you have. What do you attribute your longevity to? Do you have any reason that you think anything you did in your life? Any philosophies and why?
No, I wouldn't pass out my secret for anything.
All right, so the restaurant didn't work out, and then what's next for the O'Connors?
So by that point, had we moved to Belmar by then? The Barrington house was too small. Obviously, we had outgrown it, so we moved to Belmar, which is off of Coventry, and it was another double house. We lived on the bottom floor, and Mr. and Mrs. Friedman of Friedman Buick. So that's the only celebrity we ever had contact with. But they owned the house and they lived upstairs. And we used to play hours and hours and hours in the park across the street, which was the edge of Forest Hills Park. So all of us kids spent most of our lives hanging out in that park, and it was a great thing. My mom continued to work at Huron Road Hospital, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, and then she had many side jobs too. There's a deer. One of which was Sunbeam Appliances. Remember that?
Uh-huh.
That was like a part-time job, because she wasn't working enough. Sunbeam Appliances. So for Christmas presents, we got like hair rollers and
I forgot about those.
yeah, all kinds of good Christmas presents from that. And then, let's see, when I was in 6th grade, so that was like 66 maybe, we moved from Belmar. Remember, Aunt Eileen lived on Berkshire, right?
Uh-huh.
And so my mom and dad were always looking for a nice house to buy that was affordable. So where did you finally find one?
I can't think now.
Kildare.
Oh, on Kildare.
Yeah, right across from Cleveland Heights High School.
Uh-huh. Couldn't be any closer.
Yeah. So that was a great house. And remember how it was when we first found the house? it had layers and layers and layers of wallpaper on the walls.
Uh-huh.
And
Yeah,
remember,
that had to be all steamed off.
Ugh,
steamed off. Yeah.
it's a terrible job.
Yes.
I've done that before. I've done that. Old Cleveland Heights houses with layers of wallpaper. I
Yeah.
think when I was in high school, I did that one summer.
Yes.
It was not fun.
Yeah. And this was with the old-fashioned steamer too. So man, we had burns everywhere. But it was a great house. And what was on the in the attic? Remember that you talked the owners of the house. So it was a older woman who owned the house, and then she was selling it for someone in the family who had passed away, right?
Uh-huh.
And in the attic of the house was the shade in my dining room, that gorgeous stained glass lampshade.
Oh wow.
And my mom talked her into leaving it. Yeah.
Did all your kids go to Heights High?
Pardon?
Did all your kids go to Heights High?
Yeah. Yes,
Except
I
for
did.
2 years for Sheila.
Yeah, she went to, what's the name of the school?
Beaumont.
Beaumont, yeah.
And then Connie, the tyrant of the family, she went also to a girls' Catholic school, right?
Uh-huh.
She went to Regina.
Okay.
Yeah. But Rick and I, we talked my mom into letting us go to Heights. It was a good experience for both of us. And Sheila graduated from Heights.
Heights runs deep in this
It does.
in this family, huh?
Yes,
You
it does.
It's funny, huh? Like
Isn't
to
that crazy?
think about Charlie and Jude going to
Yeah,
Heights.
that's
is
right. Your
pretty crazy,
grandkids are
right?
going to Heights.
You know,
Nuts, huh?
Brian marrying into a Heights family.
Right?
You know,
Yep. Yep. Crazy, huh? Adam went to Heights.
you're back in the Heights.
Yeah.
So
Can't get away.
did you guys talk while I was away about going to Florida?
No, we just talked. I was talking about our party.
Yeah. Yeah,
how
that
much
was
fun
fun.
that was. So yeah, so your kids go to high school. Did you all go to college?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, we all went to various colleges. Sheila went to Cleveland State and eventually Kent. I went to St. John College for nursing. Oh, should I tell the story about what you told me as far as my career choice? I always wanted to be a veterinarian. And my mom, I was telling my mom that, and after some discussion, she said, well, if you're going to put in all that time, why don't you take care of people? So I ended up at St. John College, and I fortunately got a scholarship. So it was a full ride there for nursing. I mean, I didn't want to be a teacher. So I did nursing, and I've loved it ever since. It was a good career. And then Rick went to Borromeo, which was a seminary, graduated with a degree in philosophy, had some thoughts that he might want to be a priest, but decided against it. And then Connie went to Kent, and also originally for occupational therapy, and then was bored with it, so she switched to nursing. So she's a nurse also.
So after your kids leave the house, finally, what's next for you and Michael?
Well, Michael is in, what's that cemetery?
Now he is. But he had a few more good years, right, after we all left the house? Well then, so you guys moved from Kildare, right?
I don't remember where we went after that.
Remember the Shoregate apartment?
Oh, yeah, Shoregate Towers.
Where's that?
Down on Lakeshore Boulevard, just before you get into Willowick, is it?
Yeah, right, just after Willowwood, by Vine Street, where
Oh.
Vine Street and Lakeshore Boulevard.
Vine Street curves off Lakeshore Boulevard, and then it goes on down through. But we lived in the apartment for I don't know how long.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Is that
probably
on Euclid Beach?
8 or 9 years. No, this is farther east, so just on the East Lake border.
Oh.
So
Oh, through Euclid.
yeah,
Oh,
way
okay.
past Euclid, way
Okay.
past Euclid.
Yeah, where Vine Street curves off of Lakeshore Boulevard.
Okay.
But they lived there for about 8 years, and by then you had gone from Huron Road admitting office to Hillcrest Hospital admitting office, medical
Uh-huh.
records, right? And remember the your wicked witch of a boss there?
Oh, what was her name?
I know what you called her. I don't remember her real name.
I can't remember her name now.
Well, she was affectionately known in the family as Cruella de Vil. But then you went to the Plain Dealer from there.
Yeah.
What did you do at the Plain Dealer?
I worked. Uh, I worked in the main office. It was down on 30th Street, and it was tucked behind other buildings, and so people just didn't know that the Plain Dealer had any access to that area. But it was where they set up the paper, and they had big printing presses and that sort of thing. So it was really where the Plain Dealer was made for publication.
Yeah.
Did working at the Plain Dealer remind you of your father at all?
Well, I did know how to set type. They have little access with all the different letters in them. So you have to know where to put your fingers to get the letter that you want out of the little access areas.
And my mom worked in the, she was essentially the secretary or the assistant to the head of the composing room, right?
Yeah, his name was Mr. Quartz.
And he was, well, anyway, many of the workers there were deaf because of the noise of the presses, so they intentionally sought out deaf people to work there. And what did you do to communicate with them?
Oh, the sign language.
Because of your aunt?
I took a course in sign language to see if I could communicate with them, quickly.
But your grandmother never knew sign language, right?
No,
Even though she was deaf.
she was born deaf.
Yeah. Yeah, so then when you retired from the Plain Dealer, what'd you and Dad do?
We moved to Florida. Florida.
Do you miss Florida?
No.
Where did you go in Florida?
Well, we moved south of Miami. I'm trying to think of the area. Oh, Venice, Florida. And we bought a house there and fixed it up the way we wanted it to be. And then I took up sailing.
Where did you sail? On the ocean?
Yeah, out in the harbor of Venice. It never got really rough, but it was a nice choice.
And you were quite a competitive sailor.
I tried to be, yeah.
Yeah.
You were in competitions? What was that like? What were you competing for?
Well, we wanted to be the best amateur sailing squadron in the area, so we competed against other groups that were north or south of us, and then we would have like a banquet at the end of the sailing season to show that we may not have been perfect, but we tried to be.
And
you
it
all
was
together on one boat? Like it was like
No.
Like working at, like how was it?
We would have two sailors on each boat. One to be one to give the orders and the other one to do what they were told.
yeah. And what did you sail? What was your boat after you finished learning how to sail in the prams? which were one person little triangle shaped boat. Then you got your own boat, right?
Uh-huh.
Do you remember the name of it, the type? Called a sunfish.
Oh, yeah.
And you remember the beautiful sail?
Mm-hmm. So we sailed out into the rougher waters with that.
Did you and your friends in Florida ever take trips to the Caribbean by boat? Did you ever?
No, we never
explore?
went that far. We just sailed around Venice and the harbors there.
Some of your sailor friends, though, you went on a trip. Remember the shark bait episode? You went to the British Virgin Islands, right?
Oh, yeah. I forgot about that.
Do you remember the shark bait episode? My mom and 2 or 3 other friends, one of whom was a guy who had a captain's license. So they rented a boat in the British Virgin Islands. And then my mom was like the scullery maid, basically. She would help out with everything. There was a navigator and the captain, another woman, and my mom. So they were finishing up with the dishes one day, and my mom went to the back of the boat. There was like a swimming platform, and she's, scraping off the little bit of leftover food. Circling around are the sharks. Remember that? So her friends got her a t-shirt that says shark bait. Yeah, you had some good adventures, huh? with
Yeah.
them. And one thing
Most
that
of
you
which-
never did was remember the sailing adventure that you wanted to do that you never quite did? She wanted to sail her sunfish around the Gulf and up the Mississippi River.
Yep.
Yeah.
Never did that.
Didn't quite happen. So that's still on the bucket
It's
list.
too late. Yeah, I was gonna say, right, Rick, young Rick. Don't you guys go? Do you guys still? Don't you kayak or
Kayak,
something?
right,
Yeah.
yeah.
Talk about what you do with your some of your grandkids.
Well, the kayaking is good because it teaches them, how to paddle and how to navigate a stream
Hmm.
and do what they can to stay in first place.
Right. My mom still is competitive. The sailboat races were held every Wednesday morning on Donna Bay, which is a little bay off of Venice, and it was a beautiful sight to see all the sails. And my mom had a sail that was rainbow colored. So
That's
it
how
was,
you could watch them from the shore.
yes. So
knew
you
where
could
your-
pick hers out because
Yeah.
it was a rainbow colored sail.
That's cool.
Yeah, it was really nice.
So you enjoyed your time in Florida. You were happy with the Florida move.
Yeah, it was a good experience, and for the most part, I met really nice people. They had there was an English couple that had formerly lived in England, and they were master sailors, but they didn't issue any orders. They just taught you the best way to stay at the head of the
The team.
other boats.
Okay. They were on the same team as you. Were they on the same team? Were you guys?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other things you did in Florida besides sail? Or did you just relax?
No, mostly it was sailing. I mean, that was my recreation.
And then at some point, I'm assuming that Michael must have passed at some point while you guys were in Florida. How old was Michael when he passed? Remember?
No, I don't remember.
Hmm. He was 70, so he really passed away not long after you got to Florida.
Yeah.
About 5 or 6 years. So, yeah, he was a very heavy smoker, and one of my favorite memories, although it's horrible, but they put in a swimming pool because he always wanted a pool, right? And so we were down visiting. He dove in. His favorite trick was to dive in one end of the pool, no matter how long it was, he would swim underwater to the other side. So, of course, as soon as we arrived with all the grandkids watching, he dove in underwater and he came barely out of the pool, totally blue. So we got him out of the pool, got him to the doctor, and that was his first heart attack. And really, about maybe a year later was when he passed away. But he was a really, really heavy smoker. Maybe 5 packs a day at one point.
Yeah, it was quite a bit.
Yeah, he would chain smoke one after the other. So he was a walking advertisement for quitting.
A good partner though, overall. Like you were. Like,
Yeah,
what else do you remember
we got
about
along fine. No major battles or anything.
it? No. And so you stayed in Florida then, by yourself for a long time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I stayed for a little while, and then things changed. The women in the sailing group changed, and they became more competitive, I should say, and it wasn't the social group that it used to be.
And how long have you been back in Cleveland Heights?
I can't remember when I came.
You moved back in October of 2010, so you've been here a little less than 8 years, huh?
Uh-huh.
So, yeah.
Next door to Don and Debbie.
Yeah. Paradise, right? Yeah, my mom made the decision that she wanted to move back, and our next door neighbor at the time just heard that he needed to move. He was transferred to Fort Worth, Texas, and he had just redone his house. And so it was a perfect fit. The exact right price, the exact right size, plus next door to the best neighbors in the world. So how could she refuse? So she's been in heaven ever since, right?
Yeah.
Any other major life sort of moments, Debbie, that we haven't talked about that you think would, were sort of shouldn't be missed? Like anything
Well, I think-
from early child, anything else from like
Well,
growing
I
up in the
think,
Depression must have been
yeah, just amazing.
really
My mom does have a story about walking home from the streetcar with the hurricane in Boston. Do you remember that story?
No,
You were coming
forgot.
home from work, taking the streetcar home, and a hurricane, I assume it was like 1936, but
Uh-huh.
a hurricane came through Boston, and she remembers walking, because where you lived, you had to go up a hill a little bit, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she remembers seeing the roofs of houses like lifting off the sides from the hurricane winds.
Then they'd smash land back, with
Uh-huh.
a loud noise.
Yeah. Isn't that crazy?
it was a hurricane?
A hurricane. Mm-hmm.
I think that was 1936.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And then tell how you got your first job in Boston. Remember, it was for Hancock Insurance Company? And that was the height of the Depression, right? 1936, when you graduated from high school.
Yeah.
And you were pounding the pavement like everybody else. Just happened to walk in.
I went to the employment office of the plane dealer down on
This was the Hancock Insurance.
the Hancock Insurance. Oh, I've forgotten that part of it.
Hmm. And they said no, they didn't have any jobs. And you started to walk away, and then you remembered something.
So, Mr. Griffin.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, he was the supervisor of the printing office where they printed out these huge policies that they had in those days about your insurance. They were like artists productions, because they had all scrolls and the printing wasn't just plain printing. it, but they would have fancy scrolls to make them look very desirable.
Yeah, because that's what the person held on to for their life. They presented that to make a claim
Right.
for the insurance, so they were very, very fancy
Ornate.
documents, right?
Mhm.
And remember, you walked away from the employment office, and then you turned around and said,
Yeah, do you have? I understand that you have a printing department here, and so the young lady said, yes, we do, but Mr. Griffin takes care of that. So she called downstairs where the printing department was, and Mr. Griffin came up and talked to me, and I told him how I helped my dad and do his printing, and so I got the job.
yeah. My mom tells the story that he met her on the stairs and essentially interviewed her on the stairs and said, "You're hired."
And unemployment was like 25% probably, right?
Yeah,
At that
or
point.
worse,
Or
maybe.
worse, maybe.
Yeah, yeah. Amazing. So that was a great story. And then,
And in that uh, interview was the way I then got to know Kay Blundell because she worked in that department. And so when I got the job, Kay and I became friends. And then she left and she went to work for, what was that place she went to work for? Oh, Jack and Heinz?
mhm.
Yeah, Jack and Heinz, which was a big new employer in Cleveland. And so then she found that there was a vacancy for me, so I got to work for Jack and Heinz. And they had a big company every once a month. If the government set up a quota, what kind of production they had to put out once a month. So they always fulfill that production, and I got the job, and then the company had a big company banquet down at. It first started out at Southern Tavern, but then the company grew so big that they had to transfer the banquet to the public hall.
Crazy, huh? Well, the other story I remember you telling when you were young, so when Dad was in the war, you used to sometimes go with Grandma O'Connor and ride the train back to take him back to his wherever he was in Fort Leonard Wood.
Leonard Wood was in Missouri, I think it was.
Uh-huh. Yeah, because he would get only a weekend pass, which he wasn't supposed to go so far away, but he would go all the way back home to Cleveland on the train and then have dinner on a Sunday with his mom, and my mom would come, and then he would take the train back. And you said he only got caught once, right?
Yes, the military police interrogated him just one time,
Yeah.
but somehow they let him go.
Yeah.
They didn't.
He just had to. You said he got KP for that.
Yeah, he got.
Was he ever deployed anywhere? Yeah. Where did he have to go? Overseas.
He did go overseas.
He did?
He went to France.
Really?
Do you remember his job in the Army? He was with the 42nd Artillery, right? I think that's what it was. But anyway, he was a radio guy. So he would go ahead and radio back the gun emplacements. And,
That sounds dangerous.
yeah. So kind of like the point guy
Yeah.
in Vietnam, similar sort of thing. So he received some nice medals, right? He got a
Yeah.
Bronze Star. He was also present when France gave, when the Allied command gave France Paris back to the French.
Uh-huh.
He was part of the honor guard, and because of his work in France, and he received a French medal also at that time.
Wow.
So, yeah. So he seemed like he saw a lot of action, huh? So, but he would always write letters and postcards back to you. And what was his favorite name for you that you didn't like? He would always say, "My dear Peg."
Oh, yeah.
Where'd that come from?
Margaret, Peggy is sometimes
Oh, okay.
a name for Margaret, yeah.
I gotcha.
And so Marguerite, I guess he figured.
Well, thanks.
But another thing with my name is Marguerite, go wash your feet. The Board of Health is across the street.
Is that what the neighborhood kids did to bust your chops?
Yeah, the kids like to say that.
Well, thank you for sitting with us. Is there, you always ask for any final thoughts, like to wrap up the interview. Any advice you might have? Anything else you'd like to say?
Yeah, I can't think of anything. Just do what you're told and keep your mouth shut.
Fair enough.
That's good advice.
That's right.